Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bleav in Bengals podcast. Yours truly, Solomon Wilcots, and our Bengals insider, Charlie Goldsmith. Charlie, look, Cincinnati Bengals are just fresh off the NFL owners meetings down in Palm Beach, Florida. A lot of juicy nuggets coming out of this owners meetings. I want to get started by some of the things that we heard from their head coach, Zac Taylor. He talks about the fact that they want to avoid the slow start. They want to get off to a fast start coming up this offseason. Think about it. Since he arrived in 2019, they're 1-11 during the first 2 weeks to start the season since the 2019 season. How do they get off to a fast start in 2025?
The most interesting thing Zac Taylor said to me about this topic was kind of intangible stuff that I don't always believe in, but I've definitely bought a lot into recently. He talked about bringing the team together. He talked about bonding opportunities. He talked about, and I thought this was fascinating, he wants the young guys, the rookies, to know the stories of Orlando Brown and Logan Wilson. He wants there to be a different level of connection and time and energy and investment in building up those relationships and an understanding of who the real leaders of this team really are. And how much does that translate to a slow start? My response to that is, yes, the Bengals have been terrible early in seasons, but I actually thought the defense was better in week 1 and 2 than it was in week 9 through 12. It's not like it got better over the course of the season. It's just when you hit those moments of adversity, what do you have to rely on and what do you have to fall back on? So Zac can't say there was a culture issue when this team wasn't connected. What he can say is he had a slow start. So they go together because those are moments with adversity. You fix the culture and improve improve and bring back the culture, and that helps lift all boats.
I want to weigh in on this very question because I think the Bengals front office could do a better job of tamping down some of the drama that takes place in the offseason when it comes to player contracts, the suspense of is Trey Hendrickson going to get his deal done, or if Ja'Marr Chase going to get his deal done. We now know that if you go back 2 years ago, Joe Burrow got his deal done in the 11th hour before the start of the 2023 season. Then it was Ja'Marr Chase, T. Higgins before the 2024 season. Charlie, I thought there was a lingering effect in terms of this distraction that took away from the energy of the team. You and I were there opening day against the New England Patriots. It was a game the Bengals had no business losing that game. However, they were distracted. It wasn't from a lack of team chemistry. It wasn't from a lack of not, practicing the veterans and things of that nature. But to Zac Taylor's credit, he's got to try new things, right? He's got to do something to get his team off to a better start, to make sure they can win the opening day to the season, and then give Joe Burrow as good a chance as he can to start stacking wins in September as opposed to chasing them in December. Is that fair?
This all ties into a lot of different conversations too. Like in the weeds thing is like, are the Bengals good enough at guard and can they protect Burrow? Well, Zac's response to that question would be last year, the Bengals, he'd say were 0-3. Every game was do or die. And then they'd fall behind 14 points. And so when the season's on the line, you put the ball in Joe Burrow's hands. The Bengals, have to avoid being in such a desperate position when they get to next season. And so again, it all ties together to avoid that desperation. You don't want to be stuck behind the 8 ball from a win-loss perspective, stuck behind the 8 ball in games. Starting faster, Zac thinks will help the defense, will help the offensive line in terms that helps Burrow, that helps the running game. He sees all of that coalescing.
Bengals opening day game last year against the Patriots, I thought they were pretty bad in all phases except special teams. Charlie Jones was kind of, making plays on the special teams. But I thought the defense really struggled to get off the field. They couldn't stop Ramondre Stevenson, the running back for the New England Patriots. The offense really couldn't convert down inside the red zone where they had a couple of turnovers where it looked like they were scoring points. Then they had the turnovers. They kind of lent to their own demise. It was one of the really flat games that I saw for the opening game 2 years in a row for the Cincinnati Bengals. We remember the start of the 2023 season up in Cleveland. It was flat. Last year was flat. That's why I think Zac Taylor wants to get his veterans more involved in the preseason so that they come out ready to hit teams in the mouth and not getting hit in the mouth. let's move on because I want to kind of talk about the rare interview with team executive president Katie Blackburn, who did speak at the NFL owners meetings on behalf of the Cincinnati Bengals. And she talked about, Trey Hendrickson. At some point, he's got to be happy with the offering that the team is making. It sounds like they're negotiating. What are you hearing? And did she help or did she hurt negotiations with those comments?
Well, it doesn't, there's not really much, what do you hear in this, what do you hear in that anymore, because Trey Hendrickson just laid it all out in the open. What have all of us heard? Anyone with broadcast television or a social media account has heard how things stand. And to be honest, I think the real story here, the news here is, Katie spoke the time of year she always speaks. She gave her update, and that's fine. We can talk about maybe some bad phrasing she used, but the story here was that Trey then the very next day, Trey Hendrickson, who very reluctantly does interviews, goes on what's probably one of the most watched shows in the world, in sports, and says his case. That is extremely rare. Burrow didn't do that when he had his contract stuff. Jason, nobody does this. Nobody talks about their own contract situation on ESPN at 1:30 in the afternoon on a Tuesday and lays out their frustration for ownership. This actually used to happen probably back in your day. You'd call a reporter and want to get your piece off. Not you specifically, but generally, people in players, your era, players would call a reporter and kind of vent. And that used to happen a lot. Again, with people in your era, that doesn't really happen anymore. People going on the record with that type of stuff. And Trey then took a shot right out of left field.
What do you think? Do you think it hurt or helped? How do you think this sort of barrage of sparring between ownership and Trey, does it help move things along? Does it set it back? Where are we in the likelihood of him getting maybe what he's looking for, maybe the team and the player and Trey Hendrickson meeting in the middle? It doesn't look like the team is really sincere about trading him. I think there's some strong points being made there from Trey and from other media members that it's not a real teams know that the Bengals don't want to trade Trey Hendrickson. So the asking price, they have said that it's very high. So what's the likelihood of both sides coming to some form of an agreement here?
You asked earlier, what does this do? It does nothing. I would say nothing even changed. They were already both clearly not happy with each other. And then all that they did was let the public in on the tension that's going on between the two sides. And so, as Zach Taylor said, they'll need to be patient, and nothing's changed. This is going to go on probably into training camp, maybe a little longer than that if they'd like. And at the end of the day, what the Bengals are banking on is that Trey Hendrickson going to say, okay, it's a contract year, let's play. That's not a win for the Bengals. The win for the Bengals would be having something that makes sense for all sides. But they have clearly dug their heels in, as they've done a lot over the years.
Talk about digging your heels in. Seems like the Bengals style of negotiation is really brinksmanship, taking things right up to the brink before things get done. They don't get done early. We already know that. Maybe you can get it done midway point. We've seen some of those deals get done, but rarely. But going right up to the 11th hour seems to be the style of negotiation. Even when it comes to negotiating with the city of Cincinnati, when it comes to getting a new stadium deal done. Currently, we just learned from the NFL owners meetings that the Bengals lease agreement with the city of Cincinnati, that they could opt out of that agreement as early as June 30th of this year. You're talking about a couple of months. If they are to opt out, that means they are 1 year away. That means this could be the very last season they play in Cincinnati. I don't even want to think about if that is valid or not, but I do think it's substantive that we pay attention to this. Your thoughts on what you heard from team executive vice president Katie Blackburn at the owners meetings when she said, we could go anywhere. I thought that was a shot fired across the bow.
The Bengals are in this situation. It's kind of like one of the big trends or stories of the league right now, which is all of these teams that are in kind of influx, not necessarily unstable, but lack of stability, lease agreements, stadium agreements, trying to use their leverage to get the newest state-of-the-art stadium. The Bengals, have to. It's funny, like when they're on the other side, it's like, what is T. Higgins worth to you? What is specifically, I'm looking here, being at the banks, being right downtown in Cincinnati, indisputably good for the city. As someone who lives at on the banks, it's good for the city. But what is that worth to the Bengals? And to use Katie's line against her, like, can you be happy at a price that maybe you might not think you'd be happy at, because there are some different intangibles that come with that? Well, for the Bengals, is there some added intangible that would be factoring into this negotiation, because there is so much value being at the banks?
Look, I could tell you right now, this one is one that I'm hearing from fans in coffee shops. We're seeing protests even around the country when it comes to, our democracy, corporate governance. What are our roles as individuals versus corporations, and how, should the taxpayer be supporting private interests and helping them to build out infrastructure to do its business? And in what way do you see that capital flowing back into the community? I think all of those questions are on the table. And I think that's what the city of Cincinnati is going to be looking at. If they were to put this to, in a poll to allow the people to decide, I'm not so sure that it would be something that would get passed. I think people are kind of looking at it and say, why are we subsidizing, the cost to build a stadium? But everyone loves the Bengals. Everyone loves the players on this team and loves the organization. I want to ask you, how likely is it that the team will opt out of their current agreement and open the door for relocation?
I really don't know. And, deadlines, as we were just talking about with contracts, historically has been something that, spurs action by the Bengals. I get the sense that we'll see in June. And, this is truly, when you come down to decisions like this, it's really like three people whose names are Brown and Blackburn. And what are they going to decide? What could change their mind? What conversations are they having at the highest levels right now? I guess we'll see. And I'll stress this one more time. There is real value in this team being at the banks. Yeah. And how much the Bengals see and monetarily value that will go a long way here.
I think they will opt out of the agreement. Based on what we heard from Katie Blackburn at the owners' meeting, she says there needs to be a sense of urgency in the negotiations, something to move things along. To me, that was sort of like letting us know that, okay, it's not that opting out means they want to leave, but it does now the clock starts ticking, right? Because 1 year later, June 30th, 2026, they would be able to leave after that date. And that's before the start of the 2026 season. But if they were to opt out, that would really get the city's attention. I think it would get the attention of the fans if they were trying to put pressure maybe on the city to get a deal done. I think everyone would be on the edge of their seat now, knowing that the 2025 season could potentially, and I don't want to send up a flare here, I'm just reporting here. It could be their last season here in Cincinnati after some 57 years of playing in this city. By the way, give our listeners an idea of maybe what Trey Hendrickson is looking for. He said that he doesn't expect to be paid at the top of the market, what Myles Garrett is getting, Charlie, at $40 million a year. But when I see other deals getting done by, say, Max Crosby, other guys around the league, there's a slot here where realistically, if you look at his production over the last 2 years, where he really does fit in over and above the $15 million that he is expected to earn on the last year of his contract in 2025. Where is a good number? Where is a good landing spot?
Trey Hendrickson's made the case that just like real estate prices rise, like the price of what he's worth has risen, and he'd like to keep up with inflation. Wouldn't we all?
That's right.
It is a bit divisive. I would view Hendrickson right now as, say, 25-ish, 20, maybe even that's about the max of where I'd go for him, $1 million a year player. Hendrickson can certainly make the case that he's 30, 35. And here's what he said too. He wants to be able to continue to really settle his family down and have that security, which sounds to me like guaranteed money. And more power to him. He should ask for what he wants. That's all of these players' rights. But it sounds like he'd like a lot of money over 30. It sounds like he'd like guarantees. And if you're not Jamar Chase or Joe Burrow or even T. Higgins didn't get $30 million with guarantees over multiple seasons. That's just very hard to do. And you can see why there is this gulf between the two sides.
So what if I gave you Danielle Hunter? His contract recently signed also, right, with the Houston Texans. He had 1 year left on his deal, the same as Trey Hendrickson, but didn't produce like Trey. And so, but he's getting really guaranteed $50 million over the next 2 seasons, fully guaranteed. That, to me, I think if you're 30 years old, you have a player who's 30, just led the league in sacks, but you were wondering how much more productive he would be past 30. That's a number. I think the Bengals, I don't know how easy it would be for them to write that check, but I think if you offer Trey 2 years, $50 million guaranteed, that's around $25 million. It's not at the high end on the per annual, but because you guaranteed the 50 over 2, Charlie, I mean, I don't have an MBA, but something tells me that might get it done. Your thoughts?
But does Trey want more security than that? Does Trey want more years on that deal? That was really the point he was stressing, is the long-term security from a year's perspective. And that deal doesn't give him that. Would Trey take that deal? Like, this is a true, I don't know. Maybe not, I don't think so. Obviously, only Trey can answer that. But the Hunter deal would seem to be the framework, and the Bengals are a team that likes to operate based off frameworks. Yeah. But clearly, there's a gap between what the Bengals view as the framework and what Trey views as the framework. They seem to be in completely different ballparks.
I would not be upset with Trey Hendrickson if he said, no, I think the framework for me is closer to Max Crosby. Okay, now the only thing Max Crosby doesn't have his numbers, but Max Crosby's younger, so you could see him getting the more lengthy contract. But I could see him maybe wanting to use the deal that Crosby did with the Raiders as maybe the framework. What say you?
Well, Max Crosby might be the best run-stopping defensive end in the league, and he plays every single snap. So there are things that Crosby does that Hendrickson is not good at, frankly. And Hendrickson's tremendous. But when you talk about the difference between $25 and $35 million, this is the kind of stuff that decides it.
That's right. That's the big difference. There are some people on Twitter, they were talking, and they said that Trey Hendrickson is a one-trick pony. I said, come on. Look, they're only asking them to perform one trick: sack the quarterback. He's not a magician. That kind of jargon for me doesn't jive. When you hear those kind of comments, because I do think people don't understand what I think for this team, he's perfect because the Bengals score points on offense. That means the defense, they need a pass rusher. They need people who can go get the quarterback. You're going to have to chase the quarterback and get sacks to close out games more than you're going to have to stop the run, as long as you're playing on a team with Joe Burrow. Is that a fair statement there, Charlie, that about Trey Hendrickson? It'd be great if you could be more dominant, but most pass rushers aren't the best run stoppers. Their job is to go get the quarterback.
It's like saying, a podcaster is a one-trick pony and that one trick is talking. Yeah, that's the job. Hendrickson, there's a little more to it than that. And again, This is the difference between $25 and $35 million. What you do against the run, what you do from a durability and consistency and run stopping and tackling, and how you rush in tandem with your defensive line, how you move across the line. Like, there are little bitty things that Hendrickson isn't good at that the best defensive ends in the league are. And that's why these differences get made. Like, what's an example? Who's a very good quarterback? Tua Tagovailoa. He can make lots of throws. He gets lots of money. You can win playoff games with him. But when the play breaks down and there's a defensive tackle right in his lap and he's taking the hit, can he get off a 50-yard throw? Probably not. And that's why he's not the best quarterback in the league. It's like these very little fine margins that make up these differences.
Yeah. But he is paid up there with the best quarterbacks in the league, even though So that's how market kind of drives prices at these positions. And that's the kind of nuance that I really like for our listeners and our viewers to be able to hear those scenarios. So that was a great example by you. We were talking about, I don't know if you saw the protests worldwide. I do think people are sending a message to governing bodies and to corporations. What were your thoughts, not just on the politics, but when you think about the NFL, most owners are paying for their own stadiums to be built. There are a few in our state, here in Cleveland as well as Cincinnati, where they want the taxpayers to contribute to that. Charlie, do you see the people in the coffee shops around the city wanting to pony up at another rate to build? Yet this would be the fourth stadium that the city of Cincinnati has built. Remember Old Riverfront Stadium where both teams played? They obviously paid to build, the taxpayers did. Great American Ballpark, they paid to build. Paul Brown Stadium, now known as Paycor Stadium. Are the taxpayers ready to pony up? What are you hearing around town from some of the people?
Well, what I can tell you is what I've heard for the last 25 years, which is that there was frustration with how the original Paycor Stadium deal panned out. I mean, that's something you hear every day when you talk about the relationship between the Bengals and the city of Cincinnati from a political perspective. It's how that deal was very much pro team. And here we are at the next inflection point for that, with 25 years of that conversation building behind it.
Yeah. I do think the people who really, I think everyone matters here. I think there's three parties. The city has hired an independent negotiator on their behalf to negotiate with the Bengals. You have the Bengals at the table, but the people need to be heard on this. I really do think people need to speak out. Either if you're for it, hey, then say why. If you're not for it, then explain in a very non-emotional way, very intelligent way, maybe what you think should be done here. Because we would love to hear from you right here on the Bleav in Bengals podcast. Lastly, Charlie, let's kind of talk about the draft a little bit here. We're 3 weeks away from the 2025 draft. Cincinnati Bengals could go offensive guard, offensive tackle, but we're hearing now that they don't feel there's a sense of urgency at this offensive guard position. Kelvin Banks is a tackle from Texas. Donovan Jackson from The Ohio State University. Will Campbell from LSU. If one of those players are there when the Bengals go on the clock with the 17th overall pick, they're tackles, by the way. What do you think happens there if one of those three players are there when the Bengals go on the clock?
This is a boring answer, but I think they'll stick to their board at positions of need. And so when you look at this universe of players as a whole, certainly a number of smaller, maybe more flawed edge rushers. You have Nolan, a defensive tackle out of Ole Miss, Harmon, a defensive tackle out of Oregon. I really like Jahad Campbell. I'm getting very close to planting my flag on him being the guy the Bengals could go get. Malachi Starks, a safety out of Georgia.
Yeah.
I really believe from a draft strategy perspective, they'll line this up. They'll take the best player available, one of those spots in round one, and then fill out going forward. I do feel extremely, extremely confident they will use a premium pick on a guard early in this year's draft.
I'm believing in what I would love to see them do, get the baddest playmaker on the defensive side of the ball at 17. Whether it's an edge rusher in Jahad Campbell, whether it's a safety in Nick Imawari from South Carolina, right? If you can get a playmaker at safety, if you get I'm talking a dominant player at corner, a dominant player as an edge rusher or an interior defensive tackle who can go get the quarterback. It's about getting playmakers. It's about getting a dominant player, because I do believe when you start to see players move up the board like quarterbacks, and at 17, they're going to have an opportunity to get a difference maker on the defensive side of the ball. And I think I would love to see them go in that direction. What about you, Charlie?
What this defense has is a bunch of role players. And not that that's a bad thing, but Jordan Battle's a nice role player. I think these cornerbacks haven't shown yet that they can be more than role players. Logan Wilson is the best role-playing linebacker in football. Probably a top 10 linebacker overall, but one of the best role-playing linebackers in football, as opposed to build your scheme around playmaking linebackers that exist. And then like Chris Jenkins, TJ Slayton, Joseph Osai, obviously you have Hendrickson. But those are role players. I love the idea of getting someone who can be aggressive and dynamic and create splash negative plays for this Bengals defense. And, Campbell and Starks in particular for me, check those boxes.
I want to get a player so that when Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, when they leave the field and the defense comes out on the field, that everybody's not going to get popcorn. Because right now, that's what's happening. And we need that kind of difference maker on the Cincinnati Bengals defense. Always great talking with you, Charlie. Let's get together again next week. We're going to have another conversation right here on the Bleav in Bengals podcast. We're looking forward to you joining us. We'll see you next week, everyone.